came just to stay 1 year, and here I am, 51 years. But I also came to see every canyon. Of course, the climate is definitely getting warmer. I mean, when I first got here, we'd have snow in the winter. But now, if we get a snow, it doesn't last but 3 or 4 hours, and it's gone. And so definitely the climate is is warming up. Well, no, for sure it's drier. It's definitely drier than when I came 50 years ago.
Primarily, if you're looking at what the predicted temperatures are, 20 years, 50 years, 100, 70, 80 years from now, 2100, and then looking at elevational ranges of some of our common and dominant plant species, saying, well, what's going to happen if they don't adapt or change, evolve? They're not going to evolve in that period of time. So they're probably going to be lost in certain portions of the park. Well, looking at it that way, look at elevations and ecology and that, you can make some predictions. Some of our shrub communities out here are going to change. The biggest changes are the pinyon juniper woodlands. Okay, we've had major declines in productivity in pinyon juniper woodlands in Glen Canyon, particularly in the last 10 to 15 years. And that is drought related primarily. I think our PJ communities, which are massive widespread communities throughout the plateau, critically important for a lot of wildlife species. Oh, yeah. I mean, the modeling is already showing that they will essentially disappear from most of the plateau by 20. In fact, wildlife, pinyon jays, are potentially in serious trouble. I mean, there's nowhere to go. There's a lot of wildlife species that are really closely tied to pinyon juniper woodlands. It's more than people think. They're actually critically important systems. This park has exceeded its historical range for summer temperatures. We're warmer than we have ever been in the past, based on data going back to the 1890s. This is throughout the plateau. It's not just us. Many of the parks in the southwest are in the same temperature patterns at various stations, and instead of going straight up, it's beginning to accelerate in the last few years.
2002 was like the driest
year
in
the last 800 in the southwest.
In 2018, we come out of it, and it's the second driest.
When we do get storm events, they're going to be more severe. So instead of just an average 1.5 inch over 20-minute thunderstorm, it could dump 2 or 3 times as much. That's going to greatly accelerate erosion, especially on a landscape where it's drought afflicted and the vegetation's dying back, and so we're likely to see enhanced erosion and flooding. Park is going to have a hard time dealing with infrastructure damage and repair in the future, especially with our own budgets the way they are.
Got those areas where desert bighorn and all the way down to fairy shrimp are all very reliant on those pockets of water.
So we do have a lot of bighorn that come down to lake level, particularly in late winter and spring. The ewes come down to calve, have their young fairly close to the lake. So we will see over time if we're getting more and more of them at longer periods of time, because they're usually gone until that period of time. They're usually up in the high country. But if there's no water up in the high country, we're going to see more of them down low at the lake. Our climate will be like Las Vegas, probably prior to 2100, but somewhere in that range. And if it accelerates and it's business as usual, our climate will be like Lee's Ferry, which is 1,200 feet lower in elevation, probably in about 30 years. Our biggest concern for those is probably leopard frogs, for reptiles and amphibians, because they do require wetland conditions, certain kind of clear, clean water. And we are the only place in southern Utah where they exist. Anything, in the future, we have no idea what's going to show up. We really don't.
One of the interesting conversations we've had is, what do we do when we start seeing some natives of the Sonoran Desert
and the Mojave Desert,
or the Mojave Desert show up?
Today's weeds might be tomorrow's natives in terms of hot desert species, native species coming up onto the plateau, but it's going to be a while because we still have very cold winters. So we have a Ravenna grass, which is our worst weed, which is a giant ornamental. and it's spreading around the lake, and it's really hard to kill. It's from the Mediterranean basin. It's a relative of sugarcane, right on the edge of the water. So lake fluctuations, and those are a result of climate. Now we do have a whole slew of weeds in the Lake Mead area and elsewhere in the hot deserts that are coming this way. Another one that's moved in about 10 years ago is Sahara mustard. Now I watched that invasion while I was here. About 2003, 2004, suddenly, just like that, it showed up. And it was a real problem at Lake Mead, and it's a winter annual, and it likes warm, wet winter. It's a potential serious threat for our native annuals and the native vegetation.
They are attributing a recent movement of brown trout up into the Lee's Ferry area, and they're starting to spawn there and do pretty good. That the water temperatures may have come up just those few degrees between what a rainbow is ideal.
We serve as the science provider to the Glen Canyon Dam Adaptive Management Program. I mean, it has to do with the amount of water that's precipitation that's coming into the Southwest. Likely the form of that water, because timing of runoff matters, whether it's coming as snow or rain. So it's not only the amount, but the type of precipitation, in terms of runoff, and the timing of that runoff as well. Yeah, how full that reservoir is matters a lot, because it's the temperature of the water that comes down. It's also the nutrient content. Changes have been really rapid. Essentially we've been dealing in a really long-term drought in the Southwest, essentially since 2000. We periodically have wet years in that mix, but a lot less water coming into those reservoirs. And what we have seen as particularly Lake Powell, as that has lowered, that's affected the water quality that's released, the quality of the water that's released from the dam. Water temperature controls all biological processes in rivers. In a point where the water coming out of the dam is relatively warm versus what it was, say, when the reservoir was full back in the 80s and 90s. The range is previously, when the reservoir was full, the temperatures we would see would peak out at maybe 10 or 11 degrees Celsius. This year, dam releases peaked at 16 degrees Celsius. But in other years, we're still seeing temperatures 13 to 14 degrees C. We're in a really good area, we call it a Goldilocks zone, to where temperatures are warm enough that the native fish can grow, can reproduce, do well in the main stem river, but it's not so warm that it advantages warm water invasive species that we do not want. Things like smallmouth bass, northern pike, walleye. As that reservoir drops, further up in the reservoir, there's sediments that have been deposited when the reservoir was full. And so lower down, you get big influxes of runoff, and they resuspend that sediment. That can affect water quality down in the reservoir, in turn can affect water quality